for this morning is from the first book of the Torah, which is Genesis 1. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky, and there was evening, and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together in one place, and let dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together God called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "That the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seeds, and the fruit trees of every kind on the earth that bear fruit with its seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seeds of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with their seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning the third day. And God said, "Let there be light in the dome, in the sky, that separate day from night. And let them be the signs for the seasons, for the days and years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over day and over night, to separate the lights from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky." So God created the great sea monsters of every living creature that moves, of every kind which with the water swarmed, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters of the sea, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things, and wild things of the earth of every kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our own image, according to our likeness. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in God's image. In the image of God they were created, male and female. God created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and cherish it. Be stewards over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." God said, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth, and every tree with its seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, to everything that creeps upon the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. Then God said, everything that was created, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished in all the multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that God had done and rested on the seventh day from the work that was done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that was done in creation. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth that were created. May God bless to us the reading and hearing of this holy word. Thanks be to God. May God empower the word in us. Let us pray. Creating God. The universe is beyond our comprehension. You created order, and it continues to grow and expand. May the light of your love be found in our words and our deeds, so you will see we cherish all that you have made. Amen. It's interesting that when we take a look at our Bible, we look at it from the perspective of how it was put together, and it's being put together, which we call the canon. We get the first book in Genesis. Now, a rabbi once explained to me that for them, the Bible doesn't start with Genesis, but it starts with Exodus, because that's their story of coming from captivity into the promised land. It's also interesting that we have two creation stories in Genesis, and the interesting part about these creation stories is they don't have anything in common. Other than the fact that there's animals and there's humans that were created, but the second creation story is when we get the Garden of Eden, and Adam and Eve, and the serpent, and that particular story that many churches or denominations have assumed that's in reference to the fall of humanity, though I would disagree, as well as some theologians. And oftentimes that's the story that we think about when we think about creation, because when we hear the story of creation, we automatically go, oh yeah, that's a story about Adam and Eve. And somewhere along the line we have skipped over the first creation story. And the reason why I kind of like to focus on the first creation story is you get the sense about God's activity in the midst of what's happening. And when I was teaching philosophy, we talked about out of nothing came something. And it's hard for us to imagine as humans kind of this out of nothing came something, that before there was something, there was nothing. And we can't comprehend, we can't wrap our mind around this beginning of nothing. And I oftentimes would be in conversation with people and about kind of how we make sense of that, and also looking at it from a faith perspective, that science and faith can actually be together, and that it's okay for us to think about science and think about our faith. This story is not a scientific story. It is a faith story. And it's a faith story about people who tried to figure out why they were there. And could there have, before God created, could there have been nothing? And when we also look at the story, we kind of get a sense of the fact that they did believe that the earth was flat. There's a dome over the earth, and they did believe that the earth was flat. And so anything beyond the horizon felt like people would fall off of the edge of the earth. And we know that's not scientifically correct, but that's okay. Because this, once again, is about a faith story. We think that this particular story was written during the Babylonian exile, when the temple was destroyed and God rested in the temple. So the temple was destroyed, their homeland is destroyed, and they are now in captivity in a foreign land, in the midst of a place that's worshiping other gods. And so if we begin our story with that understanding, then we understand, as some Bibles would interpret the beginning as there was chaos. The waters, the nothingness, there was chaos. And I would assume that when you are in captivity, oftentimes in prison, oftentimes being used as a slave, understanding the God that you know is not the God that you're hearing, that you probably would feel like life is chaotic. And so if we focus on this kind of understanding of chaos, then we can carry that with us in our world that we live in and not lose hope of God. So as they're living through chaos, they're not losing hope in the fact that one day God would create something out of chaos. And so the story kind of invites us to look at the possibility that God is still creating. Because we encounter chaos in our world every day. And we have to think, or I think, and as I try to make sense of what's going on, I have to hold on to the fact that God will one day create something good out of what feels like chaos. And so in the midst of their understanding of everything we know is gone, and now we have nothing. In the midst of that feeling, then they began to think, out of nothing, surely God can create something. So as the nothingness was happening, as the chaos was happening, and as things were going on, we get this sense of God then burst forth. And God burst forth with light. Now this particular story was what, once again, was written after the second creation story. So it makes sense then, if we put it in context, why this story came along and why this writer felt compelled to write it down. And so this particular story in the book of Genesis is part of the Pentateuch, or the Torah, or the Law, the first 5 books that the Hebrew people hold in reverence. And if anybody's ever been to a Jewish temple, when they read the scripture, it is an event. They open the place where the scrolls are kept, and they bring out the scroll, and the scrolls are huge. In reality, they're not that big. But the scrolls are huge, and they move around the congregation, and they sing. And if you're a Jew, you can touch the Torah before it's uncovered. And so it's an exciting event to read the scripture. And it's hard not to, my kind of white German, let's not get excited background, that is a part of who I am, It's kind of overwhelming at first to see the excitement. But if we kind of open our Bible and read our stories with enthusiasm and with excitement, it gives us meaning and it gives us ownership of that which we have been given. So we need to take ownership of this story in Genesis. We need to take ownership of what God has asked of us. And I think it's interesting that in this story, the last thing God creates is humanity. And I'm a fan of the Waltons. I know that kind of dates me as far as how old I am, but I'm a fan of the Waltons. And I remember, I know the Waltons probably by memory. But I remember this one particular moment when Grandpa was talking to John Boy. And they were just kind of talking about, life in general. And Grandpa said, Grandpa was all about nature, right? And he was that way in real life, by the way. And he said, we really should pay attention to the fact that God created everything else before God created humanity. And so maybe those other things are more important than we are. And when I heard that, at that time in which that story was airing, it made an impact on me. Because it allowed me to think about the fact that we need to move away from thinking that we are the center of the earth. And that was kind of the early understanding of humanity. Humans are the center of the earth and everything else revolves around it. And it put in perspective that we are no more important than the other things that God has created. So when God is creating, and when God creates humanity, we hear this. Let us create humanity in our image. Now, we don't know who the lettuce is, how many, is God talking to somebody else when God's creating? Probably some of that influence of the other gods is coming in. Let us create humankind in our image. In the image of God, they were created male and female. That means, for me, that means that we have a divine spark of God in us. And if we have a divine spark of God in us, then therefore, we have a huge responsibility to take care of that which God has created. Think about that. If we take the story, this faith story, and we own it, we just have been told that we are created in the image of God. We have been created in the image of God. It makes life seem different. And it makes our understanding feel different. Because if we're created in the image of God, then no matter what the chaos might be, God is in each and every one of us. When your temple has been destroyed, when this resting place of where God is supposed to be is gone, God does not leave us. seems to me also when you think about people who have lost their church because of a tornado or a flood or whatever, you don't hear them say, "Where is God?" You hear them say, "What do we need to do? What do we need to do to pick ourselves up and figure out what we do next, knowing that God is still with us, knowing that God rests in each and every one of us?" So not unlike the Israelites who were in captivity in Babylon, we did get a sense of, it may be chaotic now, but God's in each and every one of us, and God will be with us no matter where we go. So we have a responsibility to this activity that God is doing. We have a responsibility to the creation that God has made. And then let's not forget this word good. God saw everything that God had made, and indeed it was good. Now, when we think about that, we do come to an understanding that not everything feels good. And not everybody appears to be good. And what do we do about that? And these are perplexing questions for us to think about. And that's why I love teaching philosophy, is because we got to think about those things, and we got to debate those things, and we got to figure them out. Could we figure them out? And I remember one time when we're talking about goodness and we're talking about then evil. Where does evil come from if God created everything? And then, of course, 20-year-olds, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. Well, professor, we have free will. And I said, well, what does that mean? And they're like, well, we can make choices, but what does that mean? How did you get to that place? If God created everything, then did God create free will so that you could commit evil things? I don't know if they were struggling with this in this story, and I don't know if they were struggling with what was happening. I'm sure they were struggling with, how did we end up in a place of people who do not like us, who want to keep us in captivity, who want to make us slaves, who want to destroy our homeland and our temple. Indeed, that would be evil. Then where is God? Where is God? I don't think they answered that. I don't know if we could ever answer that. All I know is that no matter what happens in life, we have to cling to the fact and own and be excited about the fact that God is the one that's in control. And God will be with us no matter what waters we must walk through. No matter what happens, no matter what is destroyed, no matter, God is in us, and we have to own that and hold on to that, because without that, what do we have? And somewhere in the midst of this chaos, and somewhere in the midst of them struggling with good and evil and right and wrong and how did we get here, they heard, they learned, they imagined the fact that out of that darkness, God created light. And thank God for sunlight today. God created light. And we need light for things to grow. We need light for things to grow. So they felt light. And they felt that in that light, God would grow possibilities and potential for them. Our life as Christians, obviously, is the light of Jesus, the one who shows us the way to live our life. That's what we cling to when things are difficult. This story has more questions than it has answers. And I love the fact that those who were putting the Bible together did not say, well, the first and second creation story don't really match, and so we need to get rid of one of them. They put them together for us to look at and struggle with, and recognizing that there's not a whole lot in common except that. Whether we believe that this is how creation came into being, or whether we believe that there was a garden and God created Adam out of the dust and God breathed life into Adam, well, it doesn't matter what story we cling to. What we cling to is the fact that God is there. And God walks with us, and God creates with us, and God engages us to take care of what God has made.